Welcome to Commerce Talks, episode number 53. Today my guest is Thomas Prommer. He is today Global SVP Engineering at Adidas, but he holds similar position at Bain Capital and Sweetgreen. In his LinkedIn profile, he stated, as an early web entrepreneur and hands-on engineer at heart, he has single-handed built, grown, and commercialized digital properties that have reached over 10 million visitors a month. The interesting thing with Thomas is he has been in the business now for really 20 plus years. So he holds kind of CIO positions when the term CIO was not yet coined. And his view is interesting because he saw several waves of digital transformation. The early transformation, when it only was about creating new digital channels, just building the first e-commerce channel. And now the second or third wave is to become real digital companies. And his view on how to overcome all the challenges that he already faced in the first wave of digital transformation are really interesting. So please listen in to Thomas Prommer. Tom, welcome to the Commerce Talks podcast. Today we are talking about global software development in corporates or corporate projects. You have been working for many big brands in your career, from advisory perspective, also from a practitioner perspective, working for these brands directly. You have been confronted with like all the challenges we have been discussing in this podcast many times, from microservices to monoliths to outsourcing, insourcing, hiring developers, and it's great that you're going to share some of your insights. But to have a nice start here, maybe can you introduce yourself a little bit so the people, our listeners here, get a better picture about you?
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Alex, for having me. And word quick introduction, technologist by heart, have a computer science background. Went through my computer science training both in Germany and in the US. And been a very early developer from the age of 10, 12 years old. As a millennial, that's when, the internet started. Very traditional model with getting my first C64 and building things in QBasic. And when the internet came out, putting that on the website, building, little games like fantasy soccer sites, etc. And since then, been always very close to the digital track. Yeah. And from a career background, I worked, the first decade as a technology leader in several digital agencies. So worked with a lot of large enterprise clients as part of that through their first, second, third wave of digital transformation. And now over the last 3 years, I've been working more on the client side as an advisor, as a consultant, to your point, also hands-on as a practitioner and a technology lead. So yeah, excited to be here and talk shop today with you.
What was the first big e-commerce project you helped implementing? Can you remember that?
I do, yeah. It was actually during my time at Huge, and it was Barneys.com. So they came to us, and it was really I would say, the first wave of digital transformation. They wanted to go direct to consumer, and naturally, as a brand like Barneys, you want to have a very sophisticated, a very polished digital experience. So that was the first project. Yeah, I remember that still very well. And it went actually back then still on demandware before it was acquired by Salesforce.
Barneys, for the more European listeners, that's a luxury department store, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah.
And when was the project? Was it then 2008, 9?
This was a little bit later. I think 2011, 2012. Yeah, around that time frame, about 10 years ago now. Yeah.
And their approach or their view on e-commerce was they wanted to have like a direct customer access via the web. I would say.
That's exactly right. And, to be honest, they were really ahead of the curve, as they used a lot of influencers, as part of the curation process. There were dedicated, product collection pages that were curated very explicitly by some of the fashion influencers. There was always this funny button that we called the Kanye West button, which is essentially putting everything in the cart and checking out. So they had a lot of high volume customers, and there was a little bit more of a hands-on curated shopping experience as well that we built out for them, like a little bit of a backroom shopping experience outside of the public one.
And do you remember the requirements of this project? Was it like we want to have the state-of-the-art website, we really want to convince our customers with the best web experience, or it should be the best looking website, so focusing on just brand experience, not so much technology experience? What was it back then? And as you said, you ended up with Demandware 10 years ago.
Yeah, I think on a really high level, what I do remember, it was a lot about the aesthetics, and it was about keeping it very, very clean, a lot of white space, a lot of black and white. And, if you look at the current experience, that's still very much aligned with that. So aesthetics was really important and getting that feel of luxury across. The other point that I remember is really, social features back then were already highly relevant, and they weren't actually as commoditized yet in the e-commerce platform. So anything from liking things to sharing things, I remember going to a lot of custom implementations to make those things actually happen. And then last but not least, really having strong authoring capabilities. So for these influencers, for these curators, making it easy for them to, pick their favorite items within the e-commerce experience and curate them up on their own personal page, including some storytelling and reasoning why they believe in these particular products or why they like them. Yeah.
Maybe we can we stick with Barney's for a minute, because if I remember correctly, and I'm not following the US market when it comes to retail or luxury department stores, I think they filed for bankruptcy 2 or 3 years ago. And I can read out of this bankruptcy filing that their e-commerce strategy was maybe not aggressive enough. Would you agree?
I think back, if we look at 10 years ago, I think they were doing a lot of things right. But to a certain extent, I think where they maybe missed the mark a little bit is really looking at e-commerce beyond just that .com property, and really much more of an operating system that you want to have, highly compatible towards all the other channels that you need to be present in, social commerce, marketplace integrations, to a certain extent, also your brick and mortar. And I think, what I see with a lot of companies that are what I call on the right side of history is they heavily invest in loyalty. They heavily invest in, direct marketing and very personalized messaging and engagement model through the means of marketing automation. And I think that's definitely something where Barney's wasn't as aggressive. And I think that is something that contributed towards them not being as high performing as they could have been with the strong brand equity that they actually have.
Could have a company like Barney's given a much more progressive e-commerce strategy? So for them, it was just like a front end in the internet, right? The web strategy like 10 years ago. But and I remember that social commerce and content commerce, that was kind of the peak in the hype cycle 10 years ago too. So I remember that was a big thing to kind of copy Facebook back then with this like feature. So that was social commerce like 10 years ago. Yeah. But with a much more aggressive strategy, like becoming an online marketplace for luxury, for example, in the setup you have seen back then, could that have been a thing that could have worked? So becoming like the My Theresa of the US back then, or wasn't that possible even for one of the leading luxury department stores worldwide?
It's a really good question. I mean, to be fully frank with you, at that point, I think from a majority perspective, Barney's was not ready probably to invest in much more than they actually invested in with a relatively packaged, at the end of the day, Demandware offering. I think, if you look at that time, a lot of companies adopted solutions like Demandware because they were cloud-based, because they were, heavily packaged, because they got you to market very, very quickly, and because they had relatively little technical sophistication in-house. And, part of that is obviously also them going out and hiring an external agency to build this for them, which is representative of, that they didn't have a full stake in actually owning this wholeheartedly in-house. So, I think from a business strategy perspective, definitely something that would have been very, very interesting, but from an operational readiness perspective, something that probably was beyond their capabilities and their maturity at that particular point in time.
What was back at the time already kind of a CIO involved in this decision making? Because the CIO thing in Europe, I think, peaked in 2015 to 16. Then I don't know, McKinsey and all the others recommended you need to have a CIO for the transformation project, and now it's more like, the CEO needs to be the CIO because it's like it's all internet. It's all internet now. So was it back then a discussion already, or was e-commerce just a channel?
I mean, in generally, I'm consistently surprised how non-frequently we actually are having these conversations with a CTO or CIO. And it's primarily the CDO, the CMO, to a certain extent, the CEO driving a lot of these, platform conversations, RP processes, but then also decision-making and the technology. If there is a, senior technology lead at all, then typically, they're more of an approver and maybe, somebody who's giving input in the decision-making process. And I think, to your point, the companies that are highly successful these days, right? The Amazons, the Netflix, the Googles, the Apples, are heavily technology-led. And, you have CEOs that are very, very technical affine. And I'm continuously surprised if you look at boards of really big organizations in Fortune 100, how underrepresented CIOs and CTOs are. And I think there's something there, a gap. Yeah.
And let's stick with this topic for a minute. We've learned it never did not work out for Barneys. It's too late, but maybe we have like a decent learning here from this case, because there are new Barneys all around. Like, it's not luxury department stores, but there's retailers with an outdated business model with exactly the same board structure or an advisory board structure you have been describing. And then I'm usually trying to compare it with the time when I was active at the Otto Group and started there 2005. And I remember, most likely, if you have an agenda of 10 topics in the board agenda, 9 of those 10 topics in 2005 were kind of offline topics, like let's create a new logo, let's go to market in France. And then the only software topic was, we have to upgrade the EDV system in somehow. And today, every modern retailer, I would say, if you look into a board meeting, 9 out of 10 topics are software-related topics. It's upgrading the PIM, hiring. Let's set up a nearshoring structure in whatever country. We're going to dive into the topic a little bit later. If 9 of 10 topics on the top level are software topics, so most naturally it makes sense to have like people with some software knowledge in there. But that is not the case, and now we cannot come back out of this podcast and say you 80 companies out of the Fortune 100 that did not manage to update your board fast enough, you're going to die. So what can we recommend, or what can you recommend based on your experience?
Yeah, so I think in general, I don't think the bar is for CEOs to start, learning software development and how to code in Python or in Java. But I do think that particularly as it relates to topics like platform strategy and, understanding concepts like what is a headless strategy for me enable versus, more traditional head-on strategy. What does it mean to be a best-in-class customer in the SaaS world versus a full suite customer end to end? I think those are really, really important topics to be invested in and to have an opinion on, and to really consult with your CIO and CTO. And to a certain extent, to spin that further around the missing board representation, I'm also surprised how often CIOs or CTOs report to people like CFOs or COOs, which obviously always are kind of measured by operational efficiency or financial efficiency versus, a much more strategic outlook and, making an assessment around, hey, we actually have to do a more significant replatforming here, and it's going to take us 2 years before we're going to reap the benefits, but it's going to set us up for the right future. That's actually a very hard conversation to have with a CEO or CFO, or to sell that in, versus a chief strategy officer or a CEO. So I think just short wiring the conversations between the CTO or the CIO with the CEO, I think is extremely important. But then also vice versa, really making sure that CEOs have the right education, they get the right, exposure, they have the right thought leaders around them who are more technology led, if that's not particularly in their DNA. So it's a bidirectional, I think, progression that needs to happen.
May I challenge this a little bit? Because what I see, so I would say out of these, let's take the Fortune 100 companies. Many CEOs obviously have been to a lot of digital summits or whatever to know the word headless or to get an understanding. But then we have like let's say a dilemma in our industry. So if you're not in those topics, if you're not doing a project implementation, you obviously fall for all the marketing tricks of this industry. Because let's go to the e-commerce platforms. So there are some of the newer ones like Spryker I'm running that are like born in this headless environment. So and the pitch of headless is usually time to market and total cost of ownership, right? So you can really innovate and you're faster to market. If I would now delete all logos from our competitor websites, SAP, Salesforce, VTEX, whatever, and only show you or the CEO the main arguments they are pitching with, you would never see a difference between us and an SAP. Even SAP is pitching with total cost of ownership and time to market, which is obviously a big lie. But that can only be understood by people that have been in those projects. So, and then therefore, I would argue that yes, the CEO must understand what like a new platform selection means for him. But it's so hard to get to a level where your part in the discussion becomes really valuable that I would argue, it's not easy to achieve. Maybe he has to start with coding Python to get to this level.
I mean, I think what I'm going to say to that, I think, if there's any development chance for even like, very senior technology leaders that I've met, it's kind of building more of a data acumen and data-driven approach, and particularly also financial fluency towards the decisions that they're making. And with that, building trust and talking a language that the CEO understands, that if we make this investment in Spryker, long-term, this is what we think like we're going to benefit from, right? And kind of translating time to market, translating the flexibility about, being able to integrate with all these platforms into a language that the CEO understands. I think very often that is not yet happening. And that's why for the CEO, it becomes very executional and say, okay, I trust your decision or I don't trust your decision. But at the end of the day, I just know something's going to change in the platform environment, but I don't really understand what that means in my language. And I don't really understand how that's, going to be relevant to what I'm going to get measured against, from my investors, from my stakeholders. And I think what worked very well for me is, to take these decisions and these very strategic components and recommendations and try to translate them into something from a financial model perspective, from a business model perspective, from a, just pure KPI driven perspective that actually resonates with the CEO. And I feel like then you also pique their interest and they want to learn more. And why is it so much more efficient to potentially, use a Spryker versus an SAP? What is behind that? And then you're having a conversation that is maybe a little bit more meaningful versus just, a strategic platform A versus platform B conversation.
Okay, let's assume there are enough CEOs or managing directors out there that are able to run through this learning curve. Do you see like a standard set of mistakes made when people are rushing into digitalization? Because COVID kind of pushed many companies now to the edge, and now they understand it, and now they need to rush. Now they say, okay, we have kind of missed investment opportunities the last 10 years. Now we have to catch up within the next 12 to 24 months. Do you see patterns that need to be avoided in this rush?
Yeah, I think there's a few learnings and kind of goes beyond the last 12 months. The one thing is, I think a lot of companies on the client side, and this is obviously a little bit of my agency background speaking, are underinvested in digital operations and setting up really strong digital PMO as well as project management structures to run these digital initiatives, which are somewhat complex, right? It is software development. It's unpredictable. You want to have a good framework around it, and you want people who hold both the technology team responsible, but also can really work with all the different touch points that you have to other vendors, to your internal business partners, all of those dependencies that typically exist within a digital project. So I think that's one mistake, to kind of take this approach around, this project is going to serve itself, versus being very adamant about setting up a really good PMO structure against it, based obviously on the KPIs, on the objectives, on the milestones that you have set out. I think the other thing is for me, really focus. we talked about this a little bit in the past, but there's some organizations out there that you look at and they have 5,000 engineers, and they're not a technology-led organization. And if you question yourself, why is that engineering team so big? And then when you start looking inside, you start noticing that they're trying to do everything from running their own cloud operations to running their own financial tools. And for me, a lot of companies underestimate, particularly in this world of scarce technology talent and the war of talent for the best engineers out there, is how important it is to set a really clear focus and how to be very, very clear around where we're going to differentiate with our own technology implementations. And then this typically drives a good conversation. Where do you buy versus where do you build? So coming back to your question, it's a lot about just focusing on the things that matter for you and where you actually going to differentiate in your market, and then rely on external partners for more of the commoditized things where you think being average is good enough for me. So I think that's a piece, and that also comes back to it's trying to do too much at one time. Especially if you're new to this world, if you're just building out your own engineering team, if there's maybe the second, third, fourth own technical implementation that you're doing, is try to be very iterative. Don't try to do 5 things at the same time, but focus on let it be getting your personalization up and running, and then you move on to loyalty, or focusing on getting more storytelling into your e-commerce experience, and take more of a sequential approach versus trying to do everything at once and nothing getting delivered at high quality at the end of the day.
I wrote an article last year for my blog Kassenzone. It's a German blog, where I try to figure out how many engineers are working at Amazon, Zalando, About You, and other digital players. And it's actually very easy formula that comes up. You can divide the number of you can take the revenue and divide this through the number of engineers, and you end up with 2 to 4 million. So every engineer or every full-time employee in the IT department, including QA, product managers, project managers, is responsible for 2 to 4 million of the GMV. And this is interesting because it's not scaling the way the standard head of IT from 20 years ago in German, the EDV-Leiter, would scale it. So he would expect like a better performance or more revenue per engineer over time. It's kind of a very stable situation there. And we are seeing companies now with let's say 50 billion in revenue, 5 billion e-commerce already, and 1,000 engineers. And 1,000 engineers was for them like a big team, but this was a team also responsible for printers, network cable, point of sale, checkout, whatever. And now, if you're looking at this quota, 2 to 4 million, you would say, okay, with 5 million revenue, actually you should have been at 2,500 engineers already, or 2,500 people. Your goal is to get to 10 billion in 2 years. That's 5,000 people. Then the question comes up, okay, often they are located in areas where it's very hard to find engineers. Where the hell should they get so many high qualified people that fast? Do you have an answer for that?
Yeah, I mean, to a certain extent, I'll probably challenge the aspect a little bit that you have to linearly scale with the volume of business, and I absolutely believe that there's a historical background to it. But the way that I look at modern engineering teams is where you keep senior technology talent, architects, technical leads, strong QA leads, strong product managers, very, very close to the business in the headquarters. But then you somewhat keep, ideally relatively flexible engineering workforce at scale. That can be through partners, that can be through engineering hubs, that can be essentially through contractors as well, that you then deliver individual products, individual projects at that flexible scale. Because I think we've all learned, or we've all seen an organization that your engineering workload is not necessarily constant. Sometimes it's go up with key initiatives. Sometimes it's a little more down when you're trying to measure and learn and trying to plan for the next thing. But I think as it relates to scale, I don't think any company that wants to be successful in technology today can be without an efficient nearshore or offshore strategy in their staffing. And I'm continuously surprised how talented, how qualified people are. In East Europe and in South America, in Asia, the talent that you can attract, and really also the investment that these people take into their job and the pride that they take into, working for you, even from an offshore location, is just absolutely fantastic. So building senior teams onshore, where you're getting what you're paying for, and then having the scale and hopefully a distributed setup as well, that gives you like a follow the sun model for IT operations, et cetera, with strong engineering hubs is, I think, something that every modern organization needs to be part of today.
Mm. From a European perspective, nearshoring locations are usually Romania, Poland, Ukraine. You've been working, or you are working for a lot of US-based company. What is nearshoring for them? Is it then Mexico or is it South America?
So interesting enough, a lot of US clients that I work with right now are using talent in Russia, in Romania, and in Belarus. But what I've learned in my career, I've worked a lot with South America, particularly Colombia and Argentina, and that talent, I think, is very, very strong as it relates to creative engineering, front-end development, agile product development. So anything that requires, somebody to have a good aesthetic understanding of what a front-end design should look like, pixel perfection. That's where we had a lot of success with these locations. And Mexico definitely is trending very high as well. I would say that's where you now end up more in back-end development work, similar to India, similar to maybe some of the talent that you find also in Russia. I feel like there's the computational foundations are a little bit more towards let's build highly scalable systems. And that's typically where we lean on those locations, while South America has been really, really good for us for this sort of creative engineering. And there's just a culture that comes with these teams that kind of further fosters that.
But would you say, like, for bigger US corporates, there's enough HR potential, especially for IT hiring in those countries? Because now in Europe, you see a rush, like, especially due to COVID, companies learned that nearshoring really works because anyway, everybody was like working from home, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah,
didn't matter if they're working from Munich or from Prague, and that leads to a situation where when now a big company like Siemens is heading into Prague or even to Kiev, it's like they will absorb everybody available in this market, and I assume that's going to be the same. And the US is even way bigger. So and even in Sao Paulo, if you go there might be now 1,000 people available, but it's not that they are producing like 1,000 additional people per month based on their educational system. So how does it go? Is it already a very tight market, big competition, or is it still in development?
No, it's definitely getting very, very competitive. Particular locations like Bogota or Medellin in Colombia or Buenos Aires. I would go to the offices and literally see how the key competitor is opening shop next door. And, by raising the salary of 10, 15, 20%, typically, you can have an impact and you can attract talent. And obviously that then ends up in a cycle where, it's not as cost affordable anymore than it used to be. I think the trend that I'm seeing, though, is particularly what you mentioned with, working from remote, that you now have yet more access towards the more, let's just call them the IT deserts, where people are not part to a big hub and they enjoy living maybe not in the big city, but in the small city. And, now you have access to these people more easily because there's no difference anymore if you're in a big city or not, because nobody's going to an office. I think that's part of it. The other thing that I think is very, very interesting, and I strongly believe in, that I think over the next 5 to 10 years, even further, individuals are going to be more associated with individual project work than they are to a company. And, we have platforms in the US like Upwork, like TopTel, that provide to you engineering talent very much on a project basis. And yes, you build relationships with them. And yes, you build your vetted pool of freelancers that you bring in for projects more frequently. But at the end of the day, you have very loose agreements with them. They work for you week by week. But it's been an incredibly effective model to find quickly high quality talent and to yet keep the agility of being able to scale up and down as you need to. So I think this more talent platform approach to sourcing some of your engineering needs is definitely rising in popularity.
What's your answer to CIOs and CEOs that would argue, Thomas, we cannot compete with Amazon or Zalando? They're technology companies, and you're advising us to invest into tech. That's not where we are. We are coming from having the best assortment, the best shopping experience. We would like to stay there. So we can never be we will never be able to compete with Amazon. What do you say to that?
I don't think every organization has to be an Amazon, it has to be a Google, and has to be, 100% technology led. But, it comes back for me to the point around, I do think you want to have a very clear strategy around where, from a technology perspective, will you differentiate, and where do you want to build something custom? To give you an example, I've worked with Hulu in the past, and I think it was fascinating to learn that they had a 500 engineering team in Shanghai that did nothing else than work on the recommendation engine. Because the recommendation engine is kind of the most differentiated value proposition that they have that's going to create stickiness. And then other things like video delivery that you would think, oh my God, that's so important to you, that was completely outsourced, right? Because it's much more commoditized. And, there's only so much you can do about your compression factors and, your CDN enablement. And I think that's exactly the right strategy, right? You have to decide on where you bespoke, where you hitting the mark with your customers, and where you externalize. And then that typically doesn't mean that you have to have 1,000 people team, but you maybe have an 80 people engineering team that does very meaningful work. So I think it's coming up with that right build versus buy strategy that's getting increasingly important, especially as there's so many SaaS tools out there, and there's so many great solution providers, particularly in marketing technology, that can do so much for you without you ever having to write a single line of code. Not everybody has to be an Amazon, but I do think you have to be very, very clear and very crisp around where will you differentiate as a technology and an IT team, and where are you fine again with being average. And every CEO should understand that, and that's really where the investment has to go.
You've worked in many prominent roles for big brands or big companies. So obviously many software companies pitch to you and say, buy me, I will help you getting a better conversion, much faster search, whatever. So if you could choose today to start your own software company, apart obviously from Commerce Tech, the best company is already founded with Spryker. So, but what company would it be if you could choose again today?
Yeah, honestly, I think that the one thing that I feel like is still very immature is general just digital attribution, particularly, in a world, where channels are more proliferating, where people are not just selling on their own.com, but on, marketplaces like Amazon or social, and really kind of looking at, what are actually our effective channels, what advertising is working for us, what kind of content is resonating with our people, both on domain as well as off domain. So I feel very passionate about end-to-end attribution, particularly tying that into kind of the new world of customer data platforms, where you get much more, sophisticated around collecting all of the different, customer data fragments that you have in your organization, putting them together in one place, and then really driving very meaningful engagements and orchestration with that. And, if you look at the role of kind of marketers in a lot of organizations right now, and the decisions that they have to make on a day around when do I send what email at what, stage in the consumer lifecycle process to who, how do I interact with them through text messages or advertising, putting a lens of machine learning and artificial intelligence on that, so that I know that you, Alex, open your emails always at 7:30 a.m. in the morning. And that's where I have your attention span. So you're going to get an email at 7:30, but I might be looking at my inbox primarily after 5 p.m. when I'm done with all my meetings. So I'm going to get that email at 5 p.m. You can imagine that if you look at 200, 300 million customers, that doesn't scale in a human manner. So you need machine learning, you need artificial intelligence, you need, very good data quality to become much more bespoke and one-to-one within your consumer engagement. And I'm still surprised how many companies are just blasting out these newsletters on a Monday at 8 p.m. And, without any personalization to it. So I think there's a big opportunity there.
I agree. But maybe we can look a little bit deeper into that. And that's going to be the last question for our podcast here today. So it's not new. It's like 10 years ago, even when the luxury wear department stores thought about like social commerce, this thing of like personalized emails was around. Even individualized storefronts where you would only see your sizes, your brands, your price ranges on a store. And it never happened. There's not, especially on the desktop side, there's not one e-commerce experience, even like in the bigger stores like Zalando, focusing only on fashion, where I would see only stuff for men in my size, my colors, it's even if I'm logged in, it's not happening. So even the simplest use cases, and you've described even a complex one with sending the email at the right time. Even the simplest use cases are not implemented. And that doesn't give me any hope that the more complex one will be solved in the future. Why is that? What's your opinion on that?
No, you're absolutely, you're preaching to the choir. I am amazed that I don't think I know a single website that starts personalizing the header or the navigational patterns in the moment where they have key information about you, gender, preferences. I mean, it's technically, it's very, very simple, right?
Yes.
But I think the frameworks that we have in place, and it's also the thinking that people have is somewhat, so much in a box, where that is, from an SEO perspective, from information architecture perspective, it seems like that is an absolutely end pattern, but it would make absolute sense. I do think, why doesn't it happen? Personalization very quickly comes with a lot of effort, right, to scale. Like when you start thinking, okay, I'm going to have 5 personas and I'm going to have 10 messages. Now you already have 50 different permutations that you have to build content for. And that's really expensive. But I do think with, if you look at the sophistication that we have in natural language generation, if you look at, a lot of the vision-based AI tools that are coming out that allow you to do a lot of great things around compiling media material on the fly, there are new opportunities here to, deal with that scale in a more automated manner than we maybe had available 5-10 years ago. So I haven't given up hope, but I do think there's so many quick wins in that space that if you take a more, kind of out of the box thinking to it, you can start activating it.
Yeah. So my summary is, even though e-commerce is around now, like for 20 years, and we've been preaching like the same things for at least 10 to 12 years, now it seems that there's going to be a lot of work for us to be done in the next 20 years. So we're not running out of work in our line here in updating the e-commerce experience. Tom, thank you for your time, and hope to speak to you soon.
Thanks so much, Alex. Big pleasure, and yes, always excited to reconnect again.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please don't forget to rate this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or whatever channel you kind of use to listen to podcasts. See you next time.